The grace of God empowers us to break free from passivity and move into action. When we act on what we believe, we release our faith, and it is that release of faith which pulls reality across from the spiritual world into our natural world where everyone can see it. Our release of faith is also the moment that God's grace becomes effective in our lives. Passivity is receiving God's grace in vain. Paul makes it clear in this verse. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. By the grace of God I am what I am. Paul was who he was and what he was by the grace of God. You and I are too. The country and family we were born into, our height, eye color, hair color, the way our minds work, the time we were born into, and so much more, all are things that we have very little control over. The fact that I'm naturally an introvert and that my wife Lisa is very much an extrovert are not things that we worked at to achieve. It's just how God wired us. But God knew exactly what he was doing in each of our lives when he made us, just like he knew what he was doing when he made you. It's God's grace that made you what you are. Then Paul goes on to say, and his grace towards me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Paul ties the grace of God with his own labor. In Paul's case, he says he did more work than all the rest. God's grace empowers you to take action. The grace of God should ignite your faith and launch you into doing something. People tend to think that releasing faith is one big action, but most often it is the combined efforts of a large number of smaller steps that we take in response to God's leading. Each step is an action we take in response to God's grace, and the faith effort that we put in makes God's grace effective in our lives. For example, it took Lisa and I 3.5 years to move to Scotland after we said yes to God's invitation to join him in the work he had for us there. During that time, there were a great many things that we needed to do along the way. For example, we needed to raise financial support to get there. To accomplish that, we did all of the legal stuff to form a nonprofit and to get it registered with the government here in the States. We put together a comprehensive plan on how we expected to get the Bible College location up and running there in Scotland. And then we submitted that plan for approval to the Bible College's organizational headquarters. We then made multiple short-term steps over to Scotland to scout the land. And then there were meetings, and we had to sort out visas and more planning and downsizing our lives almost completely into a handful of suitcases and on and on. Each one of these smaller steps released some faith. As we saw God's grace give us favor in the smaller things, we were strengthened in our confidence to where we were able to take bigger steps and release more faith too. During those 3.5 years, Lisa and I were waiting to get to Scotland. At the same time, we were actively working on all sorts of preparations so that we were ready to pull the trigger and move to Scotland at the very moment that God sorted out the things which were beyond our control. And that brings us to the last thing that Paul said in that verse. Yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. God's grace is what is at work within us. He's the one that gave Lisa and I the abilities, skills, and talents to do all the things that we've done. He gives us favor with people along the way to make our tasks easier, and he's even the one who calls us and anoints us for a particular assignment. He does the same thing for every believer. Until God's grace is mixed with our faith and we take action, we've still only received God's grace in vain. We must believe the truth that God empowers us to do the things that we're called to do so that we can step up and start to do them.